Poor waitress slapped the mafia boss in public for her friend. What he did next was shocking. I slapped the face of a mafia boss in the middle of a crowded coffee shop because he humiliated my best friend. He stared at me for a long, breathless moment, then smiled and said, "Finally, someone real." The scent of scorched sugar and stale coffee clung to my uniform like the fragrance of endurance. It was the end of a long Saturday night shift at the midnight roast, and my legs were nearly giving out after close to 10 hours on my feet. But all that exhaustion was worth it because of Grace. Grace, my closest friend, the only person who stood by me when I was 26 and pregnant with my son, abandoned in a rundown rental apartment tucked in a forgotten corner of the South Loop, was now the reason I kept going. She stood behind the bar, drying a glass with a cloth, but her eyes were sunken with worry. Grace didn't smile like she usually did. Her face was tight with tension, and I knew right away something was wrong. The debt she owed Vincent Morelli had come due, and I understood that no matter how much she tried to appear strong, the weight of it was now impossible to outrun. I had tried. Every tip gathered from long hours serving tables, every extra shift I took beyond my schedule. It was all to keep Grace from falling into the clutches of that ruthless underworld. I wasn't dreaming of much, just a small roof over our heads, a scratched wooden table where my son and I could share quiet dinners together. But that dream kept slipping further away each time Grace's phone buzzed with one of those cold, short messages from the most powerful man south of the city. I was wiping down a table by the window, crumbs from old cookies and crumpled napkins still clinging to its surface, when the doorbell chimed. That sound usually meant the end of the night, but this time the air in the cafe grew thick and still. 3 men stepped in, dragging with them a cold that cut through the room like a blade. The 2 behind were in black suits, tall and broad-shouldered enough to block the aisles. The one in front was taller still, wrapped in a long, dark gray coat, his slicked-back hair jet black and perfectly in place. I had never seen Vincent Morelli before, but the moment I laid eyes on him, I knew it was him. His gaze swept the cafe, landing on Grace, and she dropped the glass she was holding onto the rubber mat at her feet. It didn't break, but her face turned pale as ash. She was shaking. No one moved. Not a soul spoke. Even Frank, our night manager, stayed hidden behind the stockroom door, too afraid to show his face. Vincent walked slowly toward Grace, each step deliberate, like a wolf circling prey. His bodyguards spread out, blocking the exit behind the counter. I stood frozen, clutching the damp towel in my hand so tightly that my fingers turned white. When he finally stopped in front of her, the air seemed to disappear from the room. He said nothing at first, just stared at her with the kind of look that made a person feel like nothing. Then his voice came, low and smooth, but cold enough to freeze the marrow in your bones. "Grace Morgan, we have something to settle." Grace stammered. "Vincent, I just need more time. Please, I'm trying." Her voice trembled, though she tried to keep it steady. She was no longer the fierce Grace I had always known. In that moment, she looked like a woman breaking, and I couldn't take it anymore. He reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet pouch, spilling a handful of glittering stones onto the counter. Then he spoke again, cruelly calm. "This is the value of your debt, and this is your freedom. But on one condition. You leave this city tonight and never return. You mean nothing to me anymore." I knew instantly this was not forgiveness. It was punishment, wrapped in the skin of mercy. He wasn't just clearing her debt, he was erasing her. From the map, from her life, from her job, from me. And he did it in front of me, as if to remind us all of who held the power. I didn't think. I stepped forward. A moment later, my hand flew and landed hard across his left cheek. The sound of it cracked through the silence, sharp and clear like a whip. Everything stopped. Even his bodyguards hesitated. Vincent turned his head, slowly. I saw the flush rising on his face, felt my breath catch in my chest, but I did not regret it. Not for a second. Then he smiled. Not an angry smile, but something stranger. Dark. His voice came rough, like wind through dry leaves, tinged with something almost like surprise. Finally, someone real. I didn't understand what he meant, but I knew one thing. From that moment on, everything had changed. Not just for Grace, but for me too. Before we move on to the next part of the story, if you find your heartbeat slowing down or your breath catching with every sentence, then perhaps you've already been drawn deep into Lily's journey. If that's true, don't forget to subscribe to the Dear Single Mom channel so you won't miss a single story that quietly finds its way to your heart each day. Please like and share this video if you believe that small, deeply human moments like these deserve to be seen and felt by many. And where are you listening from? Leave us a comment below and let us know. Is it a quiet little town, a corner table in your favorite coffee shop, or your kitchen at the end of a long day? We would love to know how far Lily's story has reached and how many kindred spirits have welcomed it into their lives. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next will not be any easier. No one in the cafe moved or said a word after the slap. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. I could feel the pulse pounding in my temples, the sting still hot on the hand that had struck him. The room, packed just moments ago with conversation and clinking dishes, had been drained of every sound. Vincent Morelli stood there, his head tilted ever so slightly to the side, as if he were studying me beneath a microscope. Not a man who had just been struck in the face by a single mother in front of his men, the staff, and every customer. But he didn't lash out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even issue a command. He simply smiled, a smile so cold it scraped down the spine like a razor of ice. Then he turned away, his dark gray coat whispering behind him with each slow, deliberate step of power. His two bodyguards followed in silence, shadows stitched to his heels. The doorbell chimed again as they exited, soft but sharp as a blade sliding into skin. And just like that, the cafe erupted into sound, chairs scraped, customers murmured. Frank bolted out of the stockroom, face flushed with fear and fury. Grace still stood frozen, her entire body locked in place, eyes wide, hands trembling. "Lily, what did you just do? Do you even know who he is?" Her fingers gripped my arm tightly, her voice cracking and shaking like wind through a rotting doorframe. I knew. I knew all too well. Vincent Morelli was the nightmare people refused to speak aloud, and I had just slapped him in front of everyone. Frank didn't wait for an answer. He jabbed his finger toward the exit, his breath ragged like he'd just sprinted a mile. "Get out. Both of you. This place isn't safe anymore. I won't be dragged into this." I was too stunned to react. Grace quietly removed her apron, her hands still trembling as she hung it back on the hook. We stepped out into the sharp cold of a Chicago night, the chill slicing through our thin uniforms. The street was silent. The yellow glow of the street lamps pooled across puddles left from the afternoon rain. We didn't speak the whole way home. Not a word. Only when the apartment door closed behind us did Grace finally collapse onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her eyes wide with panic. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have gotten involved. I couldn't just stand there and let him humiliate you like that," I said softly, forcing my voice to stay even. But inside, I was unraveling. Fear was creeping down my spine like ice. I had struck at the pride of a man who didn't understand the meaning of forgiveness. It was near midnight when I stepped out of the shower and pulled on an old set of pajamas. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. 10 digits, no name. I picked it up, my palm suddenly cold and clammy. The message was short, neat, like an invitation carved in stone. Ms. Vance, your presence is requested at the Morelli Estate, number 16 Bellhaven Road, 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. We must discuss the debt of Grace Morgan. Your punctuality will ensure her safety. Failure to appear will result in undesirable consequences. VM. My heart missed a beat. My chest tightened. I read it once, then again, and again. By the fourth time, the words felt carved into my skin. He hadn't sent men to bang on our door. He hadn't burned a car or left a threat scrawled in blood. He sent a message. Old-fashioned. Chilling. I took the phone and walked into the living room where Grace was still awake, her eyes swollen from silent crying. I handed her the phone. She read it, then looked up at me, horror etched into every line of her face. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she whispered. I didn't answer, because we both knew. Stopping had never been in Vincent Morelli's nature. I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling, the weight in my chest pressing harder with every passing hour. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I had no one to call for help. As a single mother, all I had was my son, Grace, and my dignity. And now I was risking all of it for a meeting I had no idea how to begin or how it might end. But I also knew this. If I didn't go, Grace wouldn't get another chance. He didn't need to hurt her. All he had to do was give the order, and she would vanish from everything. From this life. From all memory. When the clock struck 6:17 in the pale gray light of early Monday morning, I was still sitting there. Still breathing. Still afraid. But I had made up my mind. I would go. And I would not bow my head. Not because I was brave, but because I had no other choice. I sat for a long time in front of my small wardrobe, staring at the 3 modest choices hanging there. None of them felt right for a meeting with a mafia boss. I didn't know what to wear that could say I wasn't afraid, but also that I wasn't provoking. In the end, I chose a simple dark dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, the only one that seemed remotely appropriate. I pulled my hair back neatly and put on a light touch of lipstick, not for beauty, but for the small illusion of calm it gave me. Grace sat at the dining table, both hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, her eyes vacant and far away. I didn't say goodbye. I simply placed a hand on her shoulder and held it there for a long, quiet moment. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze, then let go. In that silence, without a single word, we both understood the same unspoken truth. This was no longer about debt. This was about life. At exactly 6:45 in the evening, a black SUV rolled up in front of the apartment. No horn, no growling engine. It arrived with the silence of something dark crawling into the corners of my chest. The driver said nothing as he stepped out and opened the back door. I climbed in. The interior was quiet, elegant in a way that whispered rather than shouted. The scent of new leather mingled with something that smelled faintly of burnt wood and mint. I didn't ask. He didn't speak. The car glided through the wet streets, pulling me away from the only place I had ever belonged. As we turned onto a wide estate road lined with towering maples and high stone walls, my chest began to tighten. Street lamps on either side cast a warm, amber glow over the smooth paving stones, stretching out like a road leading into another world. The house appeared after the final curve, unlike anything I'd ever seen. A structure of cool gray stone with massive oak doors, tall windows that seemed to watch you, and a black tiled roof that loomed like a shadow. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress, a statement. A monument to quiet, absolute power. The driver stopped, stepped out, and opened the door for me. Still without a word. Still without a glance. Just performing a duty he had likely done 100 times. I stepped out, the air brushing cold against my face, carrying the earthy scent of damp ground and jasmine. The front door opened before I could touch it. An older woman stood waiting, her silver hair neatly cropped, dressed in a crisp black suit. "Ms. Vance, this way, please." Her voice wasn't sharp, but it was firm. I followed her through a grand hallway of marble tile and soaring ceilings, lit by chandeliers that glowed like old stars. Each step echoed behind us like a countdown. The walls were lined with old portraits, men with deep-set eyes and solemn expressions, watching me as I passed beneath their gaze. We stopped before a heavy wooden door with a brass handle carved in the shape of a lion's head. She didn't knock, just pushed it gently. The door swung open without a sound. Inside was a large room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, warm light spilling from 2 table lamps. At its center stood a wide wooden desk, and behind it, a leather chair turned away from me. I stepped in. The door clicked shut behind me with a soft finality. The chair turned. Vincent Morelli sat there, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal a silver watch at his wrist. He didn't stand. He didn't gesture toward the seat across from him. He only looked at me, his steel-gray eyes devoid of expression. "You're on time." "Good." His voice was low, dry, like a man reading a report. I stood tall, though my knees were ready to buckle. I didn't know if it was fear or the wave of dizziness that was rising fast. "I'm here for Grace," I said. He tilted his head slightly as if weighing something in the air between us. Then he smiled, a slow curve of the lips without warmth. "And I'm here for the truth. About you. About the woman who slapped me in public and still managed to stand." The room seemed to narrow in. Every light, every sound, even the air itself dimming around us. It was just me and him. 2 people standing at either end of a sentence that had yet to be spoken. He motioned. "Sit." I walked forward, steadying my breath, clasping my hands to keep them from shaking. The chair was so soft it felt almost wrong, like it was swallowing me whole. Part of me wanted to run. Another part felt a strange, eerie calm, as if I'd already crossed through a door that couldn't be undone. And I knew then, whatever was about to be said in this room would change me. Forever. Vincent Morelli looked at me through the soft halo of the desk lamp, his hands folded neatly in front of him, thumbs tapping lightly as if weighing each word before it left his mouth. The space between us was only a few feet, but it stretched like a canyon. I felt like a fish caught in a net, still in the water but with no way out. He didn't rush. He didn't threaten. He didn't issue a warning. He simply watched. Every movement, every blink, as if he were reading me line by line, a book already opened, already exposed. Finally he spoke, his voice no louder than a breeze but sharp as a blade. I thought long and hard about how to respond to such a public insult. I had a full list of options. One wave of a hand, and it would have been done. But then I wondered, why would a woman like you dare to do what you did? A reckless, impulsive act, and in some strange way, noteworthy. I said nothing. I knew I wasn't here to explain. I was here to hear the sentence. Vincent opened a drawer, took out a cream-colored envelope, and set it on the table, pushing it gently toward me. I stared at it, but didn't move. It wasn't a contract. No signatures, no lawyers, but its weight filled the room more than any legal document could. He continued, "You will work for me, full-time, personal assistant, residence, transport, security, all arranged. Grace Morgan's debt will be cleared, entirely, unconditionally, and she will be allowed to leave this city unharmed." I looked up, locking eyes with him. "And me. What will I be in your world?" This time he didn't smile. His voice dropped lower, slower, like he wanted me to hear each word echo down my spine. "You will be the person I trust to handle matters requiring precision, discretion, and honesty. You will not leave the estate without permission. You will not speak of anything you see, hear, or understand. You will not refuse an assignment, though I will not ask you to cross lines of basic humanity. If you agree, we begin tonight. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. This wasn't a job. This was captivity wrapped in silk, a cage carved from polished words, and he knew that. I asked, "What if I say no?" He leaned back, just slightly. His eyes cooled. "Then I'll consider this meeting never happened. But Grace's debt returns, with penalties and consequences, for the insult to my name. And I'm not certain she has enough time left to try again." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his tone. But that sentence struck my chest like a hammer. I knew he wouldn't lay a hand on her, but he wouldn't stop anyone else from doing it either. I opened the envelope. Inside was a typed page outlining tasks, schedules, expectations, and conditions. Clear, precise, no space for emotion. I scanned it quickly, then looked up. If I agree, what rights do I have? He tilted his head. An interesting question. You will have your own living space, all basic needs provided. You may request reasonable time off if granted, and if you perform well, you may have a voice in certain decisions. But leaving? No. As long as Grace lives and walks free, you remain here. I nodded. A slow nod, heavy as 100 pounds pressing against my neck. Then he stood, tall and expressionless under the gold-tinged light. You have 30 minutes to settle in. Ms. Rowe will take you. Everything has been arranged. I rose, the envelope still in my hand, and stepped out of that room heavy with the scent of old wood and the kind of silence that clings like cigarette smoke. The housekeeper was waiting just outside, her expression unreadable, though in the subtle gestures she made to signal me to follow, there was a flicker barely there of something that might have been pity. I walked behind her down another hallway, my mind churning with questions I didn't yet know how to form. There were no handcuffs, no chains. And yet, with each step I took, it felt as if something permanent was being etched into stone. I didn't know what exactly I had just agreed to, only that I had stepped into a life with no return. And the price of freedom for someone I loved might very well be the erasure of myself. My room was on the second floor, at the far end of the West Wing. Ms. Rowe led the way without a word of small talk. She opened the door, stepped in ahead of me like she was checking it over one final time, then turned back and gave a small nod. "This will be your space from now on." Her voice was level, neither cold nor warm. The room was larger than the apartment Grace and I had once shared. Polished wooden floors, a tall window overlooking a quiet garden where crimson maple leaves shimmered under the pale light of the night. A large oak bed made with flawless white linens, a writing desk, an armchair beside a bookshelf filled with old leather-bound volumes, and a private bathroom with gleaming mirrors and towels folded with mechanical precision. Everything was clean, orderly, quietly luxurious, not ostentatious, but beautiful in a way that was both seductive and suffocating, like a gilded cage. I stood in the middle of the room, the envelope still unopened for a second time in my hand. Ms. Rowe regarded me briefly, then added, "You will receive your daily schedule through the internal system. No one but Mr. Morelli has the authority to alter it. Meals are served promptly in the south dining room unless otherwise directed. Someone will bring you uniforms and necessary items in the morning." I nodded, trying to appear calm. She gave a slight nod in return and turned to leave, closing the door behind her without waiting for any farewell. The door shut softly, but with finality. I stood there for a long moment, motionless. Everything in that room was foreign to me, elegant, expensive, precise, but none of it made me feel at home. I sat down on the edge of the bed, ran my hand across the smooth white sheets. Suddenly, I felt empty, as if I no longer had a name, no longer had a past. Only one role now: personal assistant to the man I had once seen as a threat to everything I loved. The first morning began with a knock at exactly 7. A young woman named Elena handed me a simple navy blue business outfit, a pair of flat shoes, and a folder containing my schedule. The list wasn't long, but there was no room to breathe. Every hour had a purpose. 8 o'clock, internal meeting. 9:30, document processing. 11:30, prepare materials for the afternoon briefing. 2:20, meeting with clients from New York. 5 o'clock, compile and submit reports. I looked at the clean lines of text and felt as though I were staring at a map leading to a future I had never chosen. The work began in an office on the first floor, housed in the east wing of the estate. It was a large room with high ceilings, dark wood-paneled walls, 2 rows of towering file cabinets, and a long table where 3 computer monitors hummed quietly. A large wall screen displayed the day's schedule and internal messages. I was given my own desk, with a computer, a landline phone, and a gold-trimmed notebook bearing my name in delicate, hand-lettered script. No one spoke much. 3 others worked there. 2 men and a woman, all older than me, all focused and silent. No one smiled. No one asked questions. I didn't either. The work wasn't difficult, but everything moved with strict rhythm. I received emails directly from Vincent, encrypted through a private system. Each instruction was concise, clear, never a wasted word. I was tasked with preparing documents, managing schedules, tracking information from business partners, and occasionally forwarding internal bulletins that I didn't fully understand. I didn't ask. I didn't object. I knew exactly where my limits were. Dinner was served at exactly 6 o'clock. I ate alone in my room, the food so well prepared, so flavorful and complete, that it made me uneasy. Pan-seared beef cooked just right, steamed vegetables with a hint of delicate spice, hot soup, and soft, fragrant bread. I ate in silence, staring out the window into the garden, now bathed in the yellow wash of lights and long stretches of shadow. Out there was the world. In here was where I lived, but not where I truly existed. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my room, the internal phone rang. The voice on the other end was warm, low, familiar, unhurried. Lily, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Central conference room. Be on time. No need to respond. I recognized his voice without introduction. No greeting, no thank you. But also, no threat. It was simply a command. I hung up and glanced around the room. There were no locks on the door, no cameras I could see. But I knew I was being watched. Every step, every waking hour, every glance at my schedule existed within a web of precision I couldn't trace. This wasn't a home, but it wasn't a prison either. It was something in between. A gilded cage, beautiful enough that you forget you've lost your freedom. And I knew the surveillance didn't come from machines. It came from people who knew how to observe without leaving a trace, and they were waiting for a misstep. I couldn't let that happen. Not for Grace, not for my son, and not for myself. The next morning, at exactly 8, I arrived at the central conference room just as he had instructed. It was tucked deep within the northern section of the estate, away from the usual workspaces. As I pushed open the door, the first thing I noticed was the scent oakwood mixed with the faint, lingering breath of cigarette smoke. It was the kind of room where negotiations lived and secrets were buried in the grain of the table. A long, oval-shaped table stretched from one end to the other, and at the far end, Vincent Morelli sat waiting, slowly spinning a black fountain pen between his fingers, his gaze not lifted. To his left sat a man I hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, gray suit, square jaw, eyes sharp enough to cut. I knew his type instantly, not a subordinate, but the kind of advisor whose influence didn't require volume to demand silence. Vincent gestured for me to sit across from them. No greeting, no small talk. Just a thick folder slid across the table toward me. I opened it, and the contents inside sent a chill through my spine. It was a dossier on a young woman, 32 years old, a single mother named Carla Vega. She ran a small nail salon on the west side of the city and owed a large sum to Vincent's organization. The debt had begun as a startup loan. Then late payments had snowballed into something unpayable. But what made my chest tighten wasn't the amount, it was the final photo in the folder, where Carla stood outside a school, holding her daughter, a girl no older than 6. They looked hauntingly familiar. The same tired eyes. The same phone clutched in one hand while the other held her child. She was me, in another life. Me, if I hadn't had grace. If I hadn't worked at that cafe. If I hadn't had anyone to call when I was barely holding on. Vincent's voice came flat, steady, as if reciting a weather report. Carla is 6 months past due. Repeated delays, no payments. We'll reclaim the shop, liquidate assets, and send a clear message. I frowned, looking up. Liquidate assets, what does that mean? He didn't answer right away. The man beside him did. The shop, the equipment, any contracts with remaining value. And if necessary, she'll be asked to sign over personal property to cover the losses. I looked at both of them, then back at the photo of that little girl. She would lose everything, her livelihood, her shelter, possibly even custody. They were preparing to dismantle someone's life because she couldn't keep up with numbers on a page. I tightened my grip on the folder, my voice rough. She's a single mother. If you go through with this, what happens to that child? Vincent finally looked up, directly into my eyes, not with anger, but with a coldness that stripped the breath from the room. This is not your concern, Lily. You are here to ensure execution of timelines, not to debate morality. I don't know what made me speak. Maybe it was Carla's photo. Maybe it was that child's tangled hair. Maybe it was because I saw myself in that distorted reflection. I spoke slowly, carefully, but without hesitation. If you destroy her, you lose someone who's still trying to stand someone who isn't a traitor. People like her will stop asking for help. They'll run, and you'll lose the fear that still earns you loyalty. The man beside Vincent leaned in slightly, whispering something under his breath. Vincent didn't take his eyes off me. I knew I had overstepped, but I didn't back down. I had agreed to work for him, yes, but I hadn't sold my soul. And if this was the moment he intended to draw the line, then I needed to see exactly where it was. At last, Vincent leaned back in his chair, closed the folder with one deliberate motion. One chance. If she can pay 30% within the next 10 days, we'll consider the agreement intact. Otherwise, everything proceeds as planned. No second negotiation. He stared at me, as if waiting to see whether I would thank him, react, flinch. But I only nodded. Quiet, steady. Because I knew this wasn't mercy. It was observation. A test. He was watching to see if I understood when to speak and when to hold my tongue. When I stepped out of the conference room, the file still clutched tightly in my hand. The fear that had gripped me earlier had quieted. I had taken a first step, however small. And I knew, in this cold world, that was the only way to hold on to the last pieces of myself. But I also understood that every time I spoke up was another step closer to danger. And if I slipped, no one would catch me. Not one soul. I don't know what held me upright after that meeting. Maybe it was the surprise of still being alive. Maybe it was the last look Vincent gave me, sharp as steel, but laced with something that almost resembled reconsideration. In the days that followed, my schedule remained unchanged. Files still landed on my desk. Calls still needed to be logged. Meetings remained brief, filled with commands and silence. But I started noticing the little things. The way people in the finance team bowed their heads when Vincent walked past. The way they scrambled to print reports. How their answers faltered the moment a question drifted outside the script. They weren't just afraid of him. They didn't understand him. And because of that, they worked like machines. No soul, no strategy. Only obedience and a desperate need to avoid mistakes. On a Wednesday morning, I was assigned to review a proposal for a major commercial expansion on the eastern waterfront. A multi-million-dollar project involving a shell real estate company, a private investment group, and a local restaurant chain. I sat in my office from 7 in the morning, combing through each page with care. The documents were polished, concise, structured. But something felt off. A single detail. In the appendix listing collateral properties, I came across a parcel of land owned by a local family 3 generations deep, never sold, never leased. I double-checked the records, traced the owner's name, cross-referenced the financial report. The small plot sat right in the heart of the proposed development zone, mistakenly or perhaps deliberately listed as a property already under provisional holding. Whether it was a clerical error or a strategic blurring of facts, the result was the same. If no one noticed, the family could be pressured to vacate, forced off their land through legal pressure disguised as inevitability. I hesitated. This wasn't my responsibility. I was only supposed to prepare the documents. But the image of Carla and her daughter resurfaced in my mind. Then my own. Then my mother's, forced to leave our old apartment over a missed payment she couldn't fight. I printed another copy of the file, marked the discrepancy, and brought it to Vincent. He was seated, reading through his morning financial reports, a cup of black coffee in hand, not glancing up as I stepped inside. I placed the folder on the table, spoke without preamble. There's a discrepancy in the East Waterfront Development file regarding land ownership. If left unchecked, it could lead to legal consequences. I expected him to wave it off. Or worse, to be irritated by the interruption. But he flipped the folder open, studied the section I had highlighted, then looked up. His voice was low, calm, a question without emotion. "Are you certain?" I nodded. I cross-checked it with 3 sources. And I think if the partners discover it, the backlash could kill the deal. He closed the folder, tapped his fingers on the desk once, then picked up the phone and called someone in legal. I couldn't hear what he said. But 30 minutes later, a meeting was convened without warning. I wasn't invited, but I heard through whispers that the external partner had been dropped. The entire project was put on hold for a full audit of land titles. That evening, I was summoned to his office. No one else was present. Vincent stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, his silhouette cut sharp by the outside light washing across his face, catching every hard edge of him. "You didn't just do your job. You understood the bigger picture." I stood still, unsure how to respond. He turned, eyes narrowing with a kind of deliberate clarity. "Everyone around me does their job out of fear. But not you. You do it for a reason I haven't quite figured out. But whatever it is, it keeps your mind clear." I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to say I did it because I can't stomach injustice. Another part wanted to keep that truth to myself. Because if he knew I still had a line, I couldn't tell if he'd respect it or use it to pull the strings tighter. He didn't ask further. He simply told me to take the rest of the evening off. No need to attend the morning meeting. I left his office with a weight in my chest heavier than before. I had just altered the course of a Mafia deal, a decision that could ripple through millions of dollars, through power structures, through lives. And I had done it with a single sentence, spoken at the right time. But what left me breathless wasn't the impact. It was the way Vincent looked at me as I walked away, as if he was starting to trust me, or worse, starting to consider how he might use me for something larger. And I didn't yet know whether that was a reward or the beginning of a subtler kind of captivity. By early afternoon, the rain began. Heavy clouds pressed low, thick and gray, swallowing the air around the estate. Wind surged in bursts, rattling the red-leafed maples by the gates, tearing through the branches until they dropped their foliage like whispers of winter arriving too soon. I was in the records room when the lights flickered for the first time. The ceiling fixture blinked twice, then steadied, like the house had shivered. But minutes later, a thunderclap cracked from the south, deep and close, and everything went dark. There was no alarm, no backup lights flared on. Just that strange silence, wrapping around the estate like something unseen had exhaled and snuffed out the pulse of the place in a single breath. I sat still in the thick darkness, my hand resting on the open file I'd been reading. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, striking the windows in heavy, relentless beats like fingers tapping out a tense rhythm. For the first few seconds, no one moved. Then I heard the scrape of a chair, soft footsteps on polished floors. Someone switched on their phone flashlight. I did the same. The faint glow guided me to the door and I stepped into the hallway, following its narrow spine toward the main stairs. No one spoke. Only silent, careful footsteps in a corridor that suddenly felt endless. The air was thicker now, heavier. Something was off. Not a simple power outage, something more deliberate. And in a place like this, nothing happened by accident. I was halfway down the staircase when a voice came from behind me, low, familiar. "Where are you going?" I turned, the weak light from my phone catching the sharp planes of Vincent Morelli's face. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly tousled like he'd just come up from the lower levels. I answered calmly. I was headed to check the server room. He studied me for a second, then gave a short nod. "This way." He motioned, and I followed. We walked through a side corridor that led toward the back of the house, where the high windows had already surrendered their light to the storm outside. With every step, I could hear him behind me, measured, steady, grounded. After a moment, he stopped, opened a door that led into a narrower hallway, then turned into a small room. When the door shut behind us, all sound from outside was swallowed. The room wasn't large. A desk, a few filing cabinets, and a single leather chair near the window. In the dark, everything felt closer, more intimate, almost like this was a place he came to be unseen. A place away from power and structure. I didn't ask what it was. I just knew it felt lived in, familiar to him. Vincent struck a match and lit a candle already placed on a wall shelf. The flickering amber light painted his features with warmth, but didn't soften them. If anything, it made them sharper, more present, closer than I'd realized. And suddenly, the silence between us became something real, weighty, full. He sat down in the chair, resting his hands on his knees, watching me. "What do you think this power outage is?" he asked. I shook my head. Could be the weather, or someone testing whether the security system truly fails during a blackout. He nodded slowly. "That's what I think too. But if it were someone from the outside, we'd have received a breach alert. If it's someone from inside, we have a bigger problem." I opened my mouth to ask more, but a flash of lightning tore across the sky, lighting his face for one stark second, then gone. And in that flicker, I saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Not just the usual cold, unreadable mask. There was something else. A kind of vigilance. And something that almost looked like weariness. We sat without speaking for a while, the steady rhythm of rain outside our only company. He didn't talk. I didn't push. But something in the room had shifted. The tension that usually filled the air between us had dissolved into something quieter. Not trust, but stillness. The kind that exists when two people unexpectedly find themselves caught in a moment neither controls. I moved toward the window, needing space from my own thoughts. When I turned back, Vincent was watching me, not blinking, not moving. There was something in his gaze that made me pause, because he wasn't looking at me like a subordinate, not like a pawn in his game. He was looking at me like a person, just a person. And then he stood, a slow step forward. No words, just movement. He crossed the distance between us, and I could feel it, the heat of him replacing the chill in the room. My breath caught. My heartbeat stumbled. A part of me wanted to step back, but I didn't. I couldn't. That cold from outside was gone now, replaced by something warm and steady, radiating from where he stood. In a single moment, his hand lifted, slowly, almost touching my face. Then the power snapped back on. Lights flared to life across the estate. Machinery hummed awake. And Vincent stepped back, as quickly as he had stepped toward me. Everything returned to order. The world resumed its rigid shape. But I knew, in that brief, suspended second, something had nearly happened. Something neither of us had planned. Not in his world, not in mine. I did not speak about that moment the next day. I did not reference the near touch. Did not ask why he had looked at me that way. Life settled back into its precise and icy rhythm. He did not summon me to his private office. I did not find reasons to appear there. Yet something had shifted beneath the surface, quiet as a root, pushing through soil in the dark. Days passed in the steady pulse of tasks and silent oversight. The schedule tightened, responsibilities multiplied, but I did not feel overwhelmed. Perhaps familiarity was taking hold. Perhaps I needed the busyness to avoid thinking about the impossible warmth that had hovered between us. That morning began like any other. I left my room at 7:30, walking down the north hallway toward the document office. But as I turned a corner, a hand closed around me from behind. Rough, sudden. A palm clamped over my mouth, yanking me backward into a cracked door I had not noticed was ajar. It took less than 3 heartbeats. No scream. No chance to fight. The last thing I saw before the door slammed was a tall man in black, and then a coarse cloth bag dropped over my head, throwing me into darkness. No words, no gunfire. Only silence, stale fabric, and rope biting into my wrists. I was dragged, lifted, thrown into a vehicle. The engine roared and we were moving. I lay curled on my side, my head knocking against hard metal with every jolt. Minutes stretched like hours. My pulse hammered so fiercely I thought it might crack my ribs. This was not ransom. If they wanted leverage, they would have left my phone on me. The only thing I knew with certainty was that I was no longer within Vincent Morelli's reach. And that terrified me more than death. After what felt like forever, the car stopped. Hands pulled me out, dragged me across cold ground, tied me to a chair. The bag was yanked away. Harsh light stabbed my eyes. A warehouse, abandoned, with crumbling brick walls and low ceilings, the air reeking of gasoline and rust. 2 men stood in front of me, one with a long scar cutting down from his jaw to his neck. The other smaller, eyes narrowed with constant suspicion. No introductions, no pretense. The man with the scar gripped my jaw and squeezed hard. You made Vincent care too much. That makes people uneasy. I stayed silent. Not out of bravery, but because I knew any word could become a weapon against me. They left me tied, alone, the rope burning against my wrists, the chair digging into my spine. Time passed, marked only by wind hissing through gaps in the tin roof and a metal door creaking whenever gusts pushed it. And beneath that sound, fear grew with slow, brutal patience, not fear of dying, but fear of disappearing. Fear no one would know where I was. Fear that if I vanished, no one would find me. But then I thought of Grace. I thought of my son. I thought of Vincent. And suddenly, what terrified me most was not death itself. It was the idea of dying before I had done anything to keep them safe. The sound of an engine echoed from somewhere beyond the walls. Then footsteps. I held my breath, frozen with a dread so sharp it silenced every thought. I didn't know what was coming next. But the moment the door burst open, I recognized the rhythm of those steps, fast, heavy, measured, not rushed, but certain. Then a voice, cutting through the air like steel, cold as a wind howling off a glacier. Get out. Now. In that split second, I saw the scarred man flinch and step back. Then both of them turned and bolted, no fight, no second thought. And when the outside light poured into the space behind them, I saw him, Vincent Morelli, standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his long coat, eyes storm-dark, jaw locked like a blade drawn tight. No smile, no scolding. He strode to me, fast, silent, pulling a folding knife from his coat and slicing through the ropes at my wrists. I didn't have time to react. My body tilted forward, dazed, and his arm caught me before I fell. He held me, firm but not rough, steadying me against his chest as I struggled to find balance. I could hear his breathing, uneven, strained. And for the first time since I'd met him, his voice trembled. Just for a moment, but enough to stop my heart. You're safe now. I'm here. I didn't know why he had come himself. I didn't know why the sound of his voice brought a wave of relief so complete it nearly broke me. But I knew, without doubt, that something had shifted. Not just in me, in him. Vincent helped me to my feet, his hand resting gently at my elbow as if afraid that too much pressure might break something. I don't remember how I stood. Only the warmth of him at my side and the faint scent of gunpowder clinging to his coat telling me everything I needed to know. He hadn't just come. He had fought his way here. He had risked himself to find me. We left the warehouse in silence. Rain poured down like the sky itself was unraveling, and the SUV waiting nearby cut a path of white light through the night. The back door was already open. The driver stared straight ahead, silent, clearly told not to ask questions, not to meet eyes. Vincent helped me into the seat, pulled the belt across my chest, careful as if I were something delicate, breakable. Then he rounded the car and climbed in beside me. He didn't speak during the ride back, didn't look at me, but I saw his knuckles wrapped tight around the wheel, the blood drained from every finger, the tension in his silence like a string pulled to the edge of snapping. It wasn't cold. It was fury held still, grief kept just under control, and I felt every bit of it. When we returned to the estate, dawn was already lifting, casting its pale gray wash across the vast windows like smoke. Ms. Rowe and two security men waited in the main hall, but Vincent didn't let any of them approach. His words were clipped. Call the doctor. No one comes in. Only me. He brought me to my room himself, opened the door, helped me sit on the edge of the bed like if anyone else tried, I might dissolve. He took a dry towel and wiped the rain from my hair, then dropped to one knee before me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a gesture meant to impress. It was something else. Something quiet. Something human. And it crushed the breath in my chest. I had never seen him like this. Not the boss. Not the man who ruled through silence and fear. But a man. Worn. Shaken. Hurting. And trying, with everything he had left, to hold on to the one thing he had nearly lost. I spoke, my voice rough and faint. Who was it? He looked up, and the steel gray in his eyes was no longer cold, it was bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept all night. DeMarco's men. They thought if they took you, I'd back down in the negotiations over the new transport corridor. They didn't expect I'd come for you myself. I bit my lip, the sting in my wrist making me flinch. Vincent noticed immediately. He took my hand without hesitation, turning my wrist over to examine it. The bruising had already bloomed, swollen and dark. His jaw tightened. I had never seen him angry like this. Not the cold fury of control, but something deeper, something raw. Rage not for defiance, but for pain mine. They won't get a second chance. I'll make sure of that. His voice cut through the air like a blade, each word measured, unforgiving. I tried to pull my hand away, but he didn't let go. Instead, he bent his head and pressed his lips to the bruise so softly, so carefully, it barely touched the skin. A wordless apology. I froze. The room stilled with me. No rain, no heartbeat. Just that warmth undeniable, alive, and terrifyingly real. I whispered, almost not intending to say it out loud. Why did you come yourself? You could have sent someone. You could have waited, made them bargain. Why risk it? Vincent lifted his eyes. This time, he didn't look away. Because I couldn't bear it if you disappeared. Not because of the job, not because of my name, because of me. The words fell with a weight that struck deeper than I was ready for. No mask, no strategy, just truth, laid bare. He exhaled long and hard and bowed his head, resting his forehead against the hand still wrapped in his. I'm used to losing things, used to watching what I care about slip through my hands. But this time, if I hadn't made it in time, I don't know what would have been left of me. I closed my eyes. What he said wasn't a fairy tale confession. There were no promises, no flowers, but there was truth. And that truth held me still. I reached out, touched his shoulder. Not to answer, not to reassure, just a touch. To let him know I heard him, that I was here. That whatever this was, whatever name we hadn't yet given it, had crossed the line between duty and something else. Something real. And that was the most dangerous part of all, but also the only thing that made me feel alive. 3 days after I was brought back from that warehouse, the Morelli estate returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. I was no longer the quiet woman who passed through hallways unnoticed, who did her work and disappeared each night into the stillness of a room at the far end of a corridor. I no longer felt like an outsider, and that didn't make me feel safer. On the contrary, it felt like breathing near the edge of a cliff, every inhale heavy, every exhale edged with the awareness that it would only take one wrong gust to send me over. Vincent was different too, not softer, but no longer distant. He still ran meetings with that low, clipped voice that silenced an entire room, still commanded respect without lifting a finger. But when his eyes met mine, something in them shifted. Just slightly. A softening. And I knew I wasn't imagining it. That evening, I was summoned to the third-floor reading room, a space only he used. A quiet chamber lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, books older than memory, and a leather chair so deep it could swallow the world whole. When I walked in, he was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the other tucked into his pocket. Outside, it was raining again. He didn't turn around right away, just spoke, voice low and steady. I knew you'd come. I didn't answer. I simply stepped in and sat in the chair by the fireplace. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he set his glass down, crossed the room toward me. The warm light from the wall sconces traced over his face, and I saw what he had been hiding: exhaustion, deep and unguarded. He sat across from me, eyes locked on mine. Lily, I won't draw this out. I've been thinking about this for a long time. He paused, as if sorting through each word before letting it fall. I want you to stay, not as my assistant, not as part of some arrangement. I want you to stay. For me. My heart knocked hard once. I wasn't surprised. Not really, but I wasn't ready to hear it out loud. I took a breath, steadying my voice. Vincent, you know I have a son. I can't live forever in your world, a world where everything is watched, where people destroy each other to climb one rung higher. He nodded, his voice lower now, almost quiet. I know, and I don't expect you to live the way I do. But I'll protect your son. I already have people watching over your mother's house. Grace, too. If there's any danger, we'll know before it gets close. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I looked at him then. He wasn't bargaining. This wasn't an ultimatum. It was a final offer, one that didn't force but left no real path backward. I stood, walked toward the window. Rain pressed hard against the glass, each drop slow and heavy. I spoke without turning around. If I say yes, it means I'm stepping into a world I can never leave. I won't be Lily from the cafe anymore. I won't be the single mother hiding behind a gentle smile, just trying to make it to the next day. I'll be the woman who stands beside you, in front of everyone, under the gaze of your enemies and your allies. He moved behind me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel his breath behind my neck. Yes. And I won't let anyone lay a hand on you unless they go through me first. I turned around, letting my eyes meet his. Neither of us looked away. Neither of us flinched. I didn't love danger, but I loved the truth. And in this moment, Vincent Morelli was offering me the purest truth. He had the truth of a man who had lived too long in shadow, now standing before me with nothing hidden, no sweet words, no promises of peace. Just himself, bare and unvarnished, asking me to step into his world fully aware of what that meant. I lifted my hand and rested it lightly on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my fingers. I said, "If you hurt my son, I won't forgive you." He covered my hand with his, warm and sure. "I'll protect him like my own blood." I looked into his eyes, and something inside me shifted. I had accepted. Not because of love in its romantic sense, but because I wasn't afraid of him anymore, and because I knew that if I stepped back now, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Vincent leaned down slowly, deliberately, as if giving me the space to refuse. But I didn't move. His lips touched mine, light and quiet as the first breath of night air in autumn. Not rushed, not demanding, just a vow made without words. And when he pulled away, I knew the choice had already been made. I was staying. Not as a pawn, not as someone bound by debt or duty, but as a part of the game I had chosen to enter. And from that moment on, I was no longer the woman who had been dragged into Vincent Morelli's world. I was the woman who had walked into it of her own will, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Vincent was gone when I woke. The bed beside me had cooled, though the room still carried the faint warmth of him. He had left before dawn. Under my pillow was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in his sharp, deliberate script. Today, it begins. Don't leave the estate. I folded the note carefully and tucked it inside the book on my nightstand, as if it were a line I was not allowed to forget. Not a warning, a threshold. And Vincent had already stepped across it. There was a different air in the estate that morning. No one raised their voices. No one smiled. Everyone moved with a kind of crisp urgency, a rhythm so controlled it chilled the room. Phones rang without pause. Files moved faster from hand to hand. I didn't ask questions. No one needed to explain. But when I heard DeMarco's name spoken in a hushed exchange between two security men, I understood. Vincent hadn't let the kidnapping go unanswered. He was not a man ruled by emotion, but when he struck back, it would be calculated, clean, and without hesitation. That night, I was summoned to the main conference room. Unlike every time before, my seat was placed directly to Vincent's right, close enough to hear every quiet breath he took. Spread across the table were maps of the Eastern Port District, transport routes, lists of contractors, and images of the logistics hubs DeMarco controlled. Vincent didn't look at me. He was speaking to his top commanders, voice deep and calm. We're not going after his center. That's too predictable, too exposed. He gestured to a secondary route on the map. We'll cut off his supply lines, starve the operation. No blood, no bullets. Just silence, delay, pressure. I stayed quiet, watching him work. No one questioned him. No one hesitated. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to demand. Every word landed like stone carved into the walls of the room. After the meeting, when everyone had filed out, he finally turned to me. He was waiting for something agreement, perhaps. Doubt. Maybe even resistance. But I only asked, if he retaliates, will innocent people get caught in it? Vincent looked at me, his gaze heavy and tired. If they do, I'll take that weight first. But I won't let it happen. Not this time. I nodded. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I believed he meant it. And for now, that was enough. 3 days later, the first signs began to surface. One of DeMarco's major warehouses was hit with an unannounced inspection by federal agents. His shipping contracts with 2 major distributors were suspended due to legal irregularities. A longtime financial partner suddenly withdrew funding, citing concerns about illicit activity. Not a single bullet had been fired, but DeMarco was on the defensive. I overheard 2 of Vincent's advisors murmuring in a hallway he doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't know where to start. And that's when he's weakest. Vincent didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He didn't raise a glass. He simply kept working with the same relentless focus. But I could see it in the way he moved, in the weight of his steps, that he was more alert than ever. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a message. To me, to DeMarco, to the entire underworld of the city. Don't touch what belongs to him, and never mistake his silence for weakness. I remained on the sidelines, said nothing, intervened in nothing. But each night, when the door closed behind him, he returned not as the boss, not as the man who controlled empires with a glance. He came back like a man who had once had to choose between control and loss, and this time he had chosen to protect. Not for pride, not for strategy, but for something deeper than power. One night, long past midnight, he came back from a meeting that had stretched into the early hours. I was waiting. I asked quietly, "Do you think you've gone too far?" He didn't answer at once, just stepped closer and laid a hand on my shoulder. "If I don't act, they'll think I'm weak. And if they think I'm weak, you won't be safe." He didn't say it like an excuse. He said it like a truth. One I couldn't argue with. I didn't like it. But I understood. And in that silence I realized some wars don't need weapons. They need only a reason to begin, and someone you can't afford to lose. To Vincent, I had become that person. And to me, he was no longer just a mafia boss. He was the man who had wagered everything he had in the highest stakes game of his life not to win, but to hold on to the one thing he never believed he deserved. His counterstrike lasted 11 days. No one else went missing. No bombs shook the city. No blood was spilled in public view. But those within the world knew each move he made was calculated, flawless, merciless. DeMarco was cornered, forced to retreat from strategic zones he once ruled without challenge. His long-standing allies began shifting their loyalty. Some went silent. Some leaned toward Vincent. The balance of power had shifted, but not through chaos. It happened with the quiet precision of a plan long laid, waiting only for the right moment to unfold. And then silence returned. Not the silence of fear, not the heaviness of tension, but the stillness that comes with resolution. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. The underground war had ended. For now. I saw it in the way the security team walked a little slower, their eyes less guarded. In the way the financial leads spoke in meetings without glancing over their shoulders. In the way laughter rare but genuine started to echo down the halls of the estate again. But what I hadn't expected was the shift in how they looked at me. I used to be an outsider, a transaction, a condition, a woman who never truly belonged to this world. But now, after everything, when I walk through any room in this house, I no longer meet wary glances or quiet suspicion. People have begun to nod at me in acknowledgement. A few even call me by name. Ro, the head of the household staff, invited me for the first time to have dinner in the staff dining room. When I politely declined, she merely smiled and said, "You don't have to keep your distance anymore. Everyone knows you're not on the outside of this anymore." I didn't answer her, but my heart skipped a beat. Not because of the recognition, but because I understood what it meant. Once you are seen as part of this world, there is no easy way back. Vincent changed too. Not in business. He was still cold, still ruthless when necessary. But when we were alone, he grew quiet, gentler somehow. And sometimes I caught him watching me like a man still trying to understand how I hadn't walked away. One late afternoon, as we stood on the balcony looking out over the distant city, he said, "I used to believe that letting anyone get close would cost me my edge. I thought solitude kept me sharp. But I've come to see that some things clarity can't give you. Like the peace I feel when I see you walk into a room. Or the fear that isn't about losing power, but about losing the one person I can't replace." I turned to him, said nothing. But I reached for his hand and gave it a small squeeze. That squeeze wasn't an answer. It was a quiet confession that I felt the same, that I had also crossed a line I never thought I would. A week later, Vincent called for a gathering of the top leadership across the entire network. A rare event. No outsider had ever been allowed in. But this time, when he walked in with me beside him, my hand in his, no one said a word. No one objected. They simply stood and nodded. Not because I was the woman he loved, but because I had survived what they themselves wouldn't dare touch. And I was still standing. That was what earned their respect. At that meeting, Vincent handed me the floor to present a new investment strategy, a plan for laundering money through a chain of high-end restaurants without violating a single internal code. I presented it as if I had done this all my life. And when I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then one of them said, "She understands this better than half your old advisors." Vincent gave a small smile, not smug, but his hand never left mine. That night, in his private office, he opened the oldest bottle of scotch from the cabinet and poured 2 glasses. Handing me one, he said, "You've come through what no one in this world has the strength to face, and you did it without losing yourself." I lifted my glass, tapped it lightly against his, and said, "But that means I can't ever go back." He nodded. "No, you can't. But you don't have to. Because now, where you stand is a place you've earned." I didn't know if that was meant to comfort me or to mark the moment, but I knew that from that point on, I was no longer Lily, the single mother from a cafe on the corner. I was Lily Morelli, a woman feared and respected by both worlds. And no matter how terrifying that truth may be, it was the one I had chosen to accept. That night, the sky held no rain. For the first time in weeks, the heavens above the Morelli estate stretched wide and clear, revealing a sparse scattering of stars flickering faintly against a backdrop as dark as ink. I stood alone on the balcony, the breeze brushing gently through my hair, carrying the familiar scent of the garden below. Everything was unnaturally still. No footsteps, no ringing phones, no low hum of helicopters circling above. It was as if the entire world had paused its breath, and so had I, waiting, silently, for what I knew was coming. The door opened behind me. I didn't turn, but I heard the measured, unhurried steps of Vincent approaching, each one deliberate, as always. He stopped behind me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against the cool night. I knew he hadn't come just to look at the stars. He never did anything without reason. But this time, that reason didn't stem from duty or strategy or pride. It came from something else, something he had avoided longer than I had realized. I spoke softly. "You've been quiet the past few days." His voice, low and steady, answered, "I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked. And then I heard him inhale, deep and slow. "About who I am when there's no power, no men, no guns. About whether, if all that was stripped away, you'd still stay." I turned. For the first time in days, I looked into his eyes, not across a conference table, not down a secure hallway, but at the true distance that mattered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My eyes said everything, but Vincent didn't stop. He took a step forward, then another, until the space between us was nothing but a breath. I could smell the faint trace of whiskey clinging to his shirt, the old smoke woven into the fabric, and underneath it all, the scent that was undeniably his, so familiar. Now I could recognize it in the dark. He spoke again. "I know I'm not worthy, not of someone like you. You were meant for peace, for a gentle man, for a home without locks and cameras. You weren't meant for this life, but you stayed. And that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. Because if you're here, it means I could lose you. And I don't know what I would do if that ever happened." I placed my hand on his chest, over the heart that beat steady and strong. "I didn't choose you for the power," I whispered. "I chose you because out of all the dangerous things in this world, you're the only one who never lied to me. You look at me like I exist, not as a possession, not as a weakness, but as myself. And that's why I can't walk away, even knowing this is a gamble." Vincent lowered his head, not in pride, not in arrogance, but with a silence that felt like an apology never spoken aloud. Then he said it. "I love you, Lily. Not the kind of love you read in books, but the kind that makes me stop, makes me breathe slower, makes me think about tomorrow, something I thought I'd forgotten how to do. You made me want to live, not just to win, but to be worthy of you." My heart clenched. Those words weren't loud. They weren't wrapped in poetry, but they were real. So real I couldn't hold back anymore. I reached up, wrapped my arms around his neck, pulled him to me. Our lips met unrushed, steady. A kiss that didn't need instruction or explanation. A kiss that was, finally, the first that truly belonged to us. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but born of every unsaid thing that had built quietly, day by day, until this moment. That kiss was far from perfect. He trembled slightly when I leaned in, and his arms tightened around my back, as though he believed that if he let go, I might vanish. And I wept. Though I don't remember when the tears began, there was no sobbing, no sound, only a silence that carried the weight of something unnamed. When we finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "I will protect you, no matter what." I answered quietly, "You don't have to do it alone. We'll do this together." And in that moment, I was no longer the Lily who first stepped into the Morelli estate with fear in her chest and questions she didn't yet dare ask. I was a woman who had fallen in love with an imperfect man who dared to place his heart on the table, uncovered and unhidden. And he, at last, had shown me that love doesn't always need to promise forever. Sometimes it only needs to be real in the one moment when life demands it most. From that night on, nothing was quite the same. Not because Vincent suddenly altered the way he ruled, nor because I began wielding power to stake a claim. It was something more elemental. From the instant our lips met with a trust neither of us had offered to anyone else, I knew this empire was no longer his alone. And he knew it too. He was no longer standing alone in a game built on blood and shadow. The next morning, Vincent led me to the strategy room on the top floor. There was no announcement, no signal. But when I stepped inside, every seat was filled, and every eye turned to me. Not with scrutiny, not with disapproval. Just the quiet acknowledgement of people who understood that the rules had changed. Vincent didn't take his usual place at the head of the table. Instead, he stepped back, letting me stand beside him shoulder to shoulder. In this world, that wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a declaration. A woman not shielded in the shadows but standing next to the boss, in plain sight. I presented a new approach to expanding our legal investments, business models that were clean, quietly profitable, and allowed laundered money to flow into sustainable ventures without attracting the wrong kind of attention. A few older men furrowed their brows, but no one interrupted. And when I finished, Vincent said only one thing. This is our strategy now. If anyone disagrees, there's the door. No one walked out. When the meeting ended, one of the oldest advisors approached me. He nodded once. It's not easy to make them listen, but you just did something none of us thought possible. From that point on, the division of work happened naturally. Vincent continued to handle the underground dealings, the balance of power, the relationships no contract could bind. And I built the legal architecture, cleaned the books, and reshaped the business structure so thoroughly that not even the sharpest auditors could find a seam. One hand kept control in the shadows. The other brought light where it had never reached. Vincent's empire evolved into something dual-natured, governed not just by fear, but by respect. Not everyone liked it, but slowly they learned to adapt, because they understood that behind every major decision now stood two voices, two principles, and no one could manipulate just one of us. Vincent had his own way. He didn't speak much. He observed. But I knew he was always listening when I analyzed a situation. And sometimes, he changed his decision based on a single sentence from me. No debate, no struggle to win. We ran the empire on a kind of trust that defied logic. I trusted he wouldn't let me sink, and he trusted I wouldn't let compassion soften what needed to remain firm. One night, as the two of us sat working late, the light from the desk lamp cast a gentle glow across Vincent's face, and I realized he looked older than he had the day we first met. But it was the kind of age carved by battles survived, by years of holding too much, now just seeking a quiet place to exhale. He looked up, caught my gaze, and said quietly, "No one has ever stood beside me this long without fear." I smiled. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of losing myself beside you. But if I can hold on, then so can you." He said nothing in return. He simply leaned down and placed a kiss on the back of my hand. Not for romance, but for gratitude. We still disagreed sometimes. I objected to a deal I felt betrayed our principles. He got angry when I refused to see the world through practical eyes, but instead of avoiding the clash, we learned to end every argument with a single constant: respect. And in this world, that mattered more than any vow. One weekend, Grace was brought to the estate to visit. Vincent prepared everything, from her own room to her favorite foods. Watching him awkwardly listen as she talked about school, I realized that our empire wasn't built solely on million-dollar deals or maps of power stretching across the city. It was built in the quiet moments like these. A man learning to soften. A woman learning not to apologize for being strong. And between two seemingly opposing value systems, we built an empire that could survive not just on fear, but on trust. Not perfect, but real. Not entirely safe, but safe enough to believe that when the storm came, there would be two people standing side by side to meet it, not as a kingpin and his woman, but as two people who dared to choose each other in a world where trust is the rarest currency. My influence on the Morelli Empire didn't come from sweeping decisions or million-dollar deals. It came from the smallest, quietest changes, from the way people began to look at each other in the cold, echoing hallways of the estate, from the way a guard would remove his hat and bow slightly as I passed, not just because Vincent was beside me, from how the cook began asking what Grace would prefer for dinner, instead of defaulting to the standard portion. Everything shifted gradually, not because I gave orders, but because they watched and slowly learned to see me not just as the woman beside the boss, but as someone who truly shaped how this empire functioned. Vincent never told anyone to follow me. He allowed them to feel it for themselves. And perhaps that's exactly what made my influence last longer than any power that could be forced. Ro was the first to change in a way that could be clearly seen. She had once watched me with guarded caution, often doubting every suggestion I made in internal management meetings. But then she began bringing financial reports directly to me for review before passing them on to Vincent. Once, when I uncovered a suspicious expenditure from a satellite supplier, she didn't bother to hide her surprise. She said, "I didn't think you paid attention to such details." I answered with a slight smile, "I don't focus on details. I focus on the system." She nodded. And from that moment, we were no longer two women quietly at odds. We became allies, each of us holding a different corner of order in a world that rarely made room for such things. Vincent's associates, men who were used to making decisions in the shadows and preferred handshakes over legality, also began to shift. They didn't suddenly become clean. They didn't transform into model businessmen, but they began asking more questions about legal risks. They thought twice before signing contracts that lacked transparency. One of them, Carlo, who had once been the most vocal opponent of my presence in strategic meetings, became the one who now sent me emails before each session, asking if I had any notes in advance. When I asked why, he shrugged. "Because I don't want to be caught off guard by one of your questions in front of Vincent." I smiled, and I understood that was the highest form of acknowledgement a man like him would ever offer. But the greatest influence I had wasn't in contracts or operational shifts. It was in how people treated one another. One of the longtime drivers was suspended for being verbally aggressive with a junior female staff member. In the past, such a situation might have been brushed aside or quietly resolved with a silent penalty. But this time, I proposed retraining for the entire operations team, not in skills, but in respect. At first, no one believed it would work, but Vincent supported it, and he showed up in person for the first session. When the head of an underground empire sits and listens to a talk on organizational culture, no one dares to scoff. After that day, a young guard approached me quietly and said, "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I've never seen him truly listen to someone like that." Grace felt it too. Each time she came to the estate, she no longer feared the men in all black. She started greeting them, asking their names, even remembering who liked chocolate and who drank black coffee. The housekeeper who once frowned at the thought of cleaning up after a child now smiled softly when Grace ran down the hall. I never tried to make this world pure. I only tried to make it breathable, livable. Vincent saw all of it. He didn't say anything, but I knew. Because every time we walked into a meeting, he no longer stepped ahead of me. He walked beside me. And his hand was always at the small of my back, a silent declaration that needed no words, that I wasn't just present. I had a place. And my influence wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of never letting this world consume me, but instead expanding it just enough so that I could exist within it on my own terms. I didn't change the nature of the Morelli Empire, but I made it learn how to coexist with values once thought too delicate for the dark. gentleness, fairness, and sometimes compassion. Not everyone could keep up, but everyone felt it, and little by little, from the hallways to the kitchen to the boardroom, from the cleaning staff to the senior advisors, people began to change. Not because I demanded it, but because they wanted to. And in a world built on cold, calculated choices, that was the greatest victory I have ever known. One autumn morning, I awoke before the sun had a chance to rise above the fiery golden maple trees in the distance. A faint light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a gentle glow across Vincent's face as he slept soundly beside me. In that moment, I didn't see a mafia kingpin, didn't see the cold negotiations or the dramatic laundering operations. I saw only a man who had carried a blood-soaked world on his shoulders, now learning how to breathe slower, how to love, how to believe that he deserved peace. Grace burst into the room, hair tangled, throwing her arms around me before crawling into bed between us, as if that space was the safest place on earth. Vincent chuckled, pulled her into his arms, and I saw a rare kind of light in his eyes, one that no one would have believed could ever exist in a place built on power and shadows. I thought back to the day I first stepped into this estate. Alone, afraid, stubborn, unsure if I would be consumed or forgiven by what lay ahead. I never imagined I'd survive, let alone change anything, but step by step, with every choice, every refusal to compromise, I held on to my values. And because of that, I didn't just save myself. I opened a new door for those around me. I didn't do it with strength or violence. I did it with resolve, with the belief that even in the darkest of places, a sliver of light can survive if someone is brave enough to keep the flame alive. Life often tests us in ways that seem unfair. A single mother like me was expected only to endure, to sacrifice, to quietly disappear in the noise of the world. But I chose to stand, not to fight with violence, but to protect with love, with faith, and with a refusal to let go of what made me who I am. My story with Vincent might feel like something out of a film, but beneath it all is something deeply real, that sometimes the people who've been hurt the most, who've had to harden themselves to survive, are the very ones who yearn for genuine love more than anyone else. And that no matter where you are, or what you're facing, as long as your heart is still your own, there is always a chance to rewrite your story. If you're still watching, I believe this story has touched something inside you. Tell me what you felt. What did Lily's journey mean to you? Have you ever seen yourself in her facing the world alone just to hold on to what is right? Have you ever loved someone who made you question everything? I truly want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. Pass this story along if you feel it's one worth spreading. And don't forget to subscribe to Dear Single Mom so you never miss another moving, heartfelt story like this. This channel isn't just a place for storytelling. It's a place for us to breathe a little slower, to listen to stories that seem distant but feel so close, so real. Thank you for staying until the very end. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you remain healthy, find joy in your days, and keep a small corner of your heart reserved for hope. Life can be hard, but if we don't give up, there is always a light waiting for us at the end of the road. Goodbye, and see you in the next video. Wishing you a peaceful and gentle day ahead. Farewell.